Tashi Delay, and welcome to Tibet Talks. I'm Ashwin Verghese of the International Campaign for Tibet, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today's episode. On this show, we will discuss China's slogans. I'm talking about phrases like common prosperity, ecological civilization, and picking quarrels and stirring up trouble. Those may sound new or even funny to you, but Tibetans have been bombarded with phrases like those every day of their lives over more than 60 years of the Chinese government's brutal occupation of Tibet. Many people understandably dismiss these phrases as mere propaganda, but what do they actually mean? Thankfully, there will soon be a new tool from the Tibetan Centre for Human Rights and Democracy that can help us decode China's slogans. It's called Decoding Ccp, and it's the subject of today's Tibet Talks. Decoding Ccp is a glossary and analysis of slogans from the Communist Party of China. And in this discussion, we'll provide an overview of sloganeering by the Chinese government and its effects on Tibetans and the global community at large. Joining us to do that are two outstanding guests who helped put this entire project together. And they're joining us all the way from Australia, so we appreciate them being with us today. It's my pleasure to introduce to you now our speakers for today's Tibet Talk. Please join me in welcoming veteran Tibet observer Gabriel Lafitte and researcher and translator Tsering Dorje. Gabriel, Tsering La, thank you both and welcome to Tibet Talks.
Hi, Ashwani. Hi.
Hi, Tsering La. Hi, Gabriel. Thank you both for being here. We appreciate you getting up early for us.
Ashwin, thank you for the invitation.
So we'll get the conversation started with both of you in just a moment. But first, one housekeeping note for our audience. If you're watching this live and you would like to ask questions for Tsering or Gabriel, please email your questions to comments@savetibet.org or post your questions in the comment section of our Facebook Live post. We'll do our best to get to your questions before the end of today's episode. Now, without further ado, I'd like to bring on our moderator for today's discussion. He is my colleague at the International Campaign for Tibet, ICT's research analyst, Tsering Dorje. Tenzin La, I will now turn the conversation over to you.
Thank you very much, Ashwin. So first of all, let me extend a very warm welcome to our guests. It's very early morning in Australia, about 7 a.m. And despite the very early hour, you agreed and accepted our invite to come and talk to our audience. Thank you very much for that. It's incredibly challenging to find a very good time spot when you have to take into consideration the 16 hours time difference between the Australian and the US East Coast. But anyways, here we are. And for today, because the topic itself is so important, we thought that maybe we can be a little selfish in being the alarm clock for you back in Australia. So, and welcome to our show. So for many of us may recall both Gabriel and Tsering Dorje from all the years back in 1999 when the two of you collaborated on a field research in Tulan and Amdo, what is now called as Qinghai province. So that was a huge project. That was way back in 1999, 22 years ago, and the government of China planned to resettle some 60,000 Chinese settlers into Amdo region, and they applied for a loan from the World Bank for the project. But then at very great personal cost to Gabriel and also to Tsering Dorje and also to American from Newton, Massachusetts. All three of you have been influential in raising and alerting the world about that project. And eventually, as we all know, the government of China withdrew that loan application from the World Bank. So that was pretty long time ago. And fast forward now, 22 years later, we have again here Gabriel and Tsering Dorje collaborating again on a new research project. And it's amazing. This research is very much needed and very valuable. So your project is like on decoding the Communist Party of China. It is like need of the hour as China expands its radiance across the international realm and steers the discourse internationally. But before this recent adventure into the international realm, the government of China has been implementing these discourse and shaping up the thoughts within the domestic Chinese population. And of course, in Tibet and in East Turkestan, the Tibetan people and the Uyghurs are subjected to all the more sophisticated kinds of propaganda in the society. So there is a lot that the Tibetans can share with the world as Chinese slogans and all these catchphrases that are doing around internationally right now. Some people find it like very charming. Some just dismiss it as propaganda. But there is something that the Tibetans can definitely share from learning from it, basically dealing with it every day of their life for past 70 years. So with this, we have here today, and in this regard, like we would like, first of all, to ask Gabriel to introduce this project, Decoding the CCP. What is it about, and who will benefit from this project, and what is the goal behind this project?
Well, thank you, Tenzin Nogila. Why do we need to dive deep into what, as Nogila just said, is usually called propaganda? More politely, as Ashwin said in introducing this session, slogans. They mystify people. As Noge said, China is seeking international discourse power. Everybody seems to be focused these days on realizing that China is in your life, whatever life you lead, not just, as the maker of what you buy in Walmart, but more significantly, China's expanding military power and economic power mean, China has a presence in almost every country, but it feels very strongly that its presence in the language we use, the way we define reality, the way we imagine what is possible, what is permissible, what is imaginable, their power there needs to rise in a way that is commensurate with that economic, political and military power. That's a big ask, but China is determined to do it, and the number of people in China dedicated to spreading Xi Jinping thought, spreading the idea of this being a new era in which the old rules no longer apply, with the very strong subtext that America and the West generally are in terminal decline, and this is the Asian century in which a small number of central leaders in China will define the reality that is the boundary of what is imaginable. So it's not just a minor exercise, nor is it, I think, just an exercise for policy wonks, for politicians, for governments, for foreign ministries. I think these days China is moving in simultaneously in so many surprising directions that investors, wealth managers are also finding, an urgent need to dive into Chinese slogans, and they proliferate. There are hundreds of them, and our project was designed to elucidate the inner meanings and above all else the intentions and motivations behind them. And it would be foolish just to deal with propaganda by issuing counter-propaganda. That's just an exercise in forcing people to take sides, and either you're on my side or you're on the enemy's side. That's not at all fruitful or helpful. Our work has been guided by the Tibetan experience over at least 1,000 years of negotiating with China, trying to understand China, having China as a very big and powerful neighbor that is inclined to see its peripheries as vassal states that of backward tribesmen who just pay tribute to the imperial court. And unfortunately, despite all the rhetoric of a new era, China's rulers today tend to inherit those sorts of imperial arrogant assumptions. So if you do want a deep, subtle, nuanced, and even subtly humorous take on Chinese key slogans, turn to the Tibetans. Tibetans have had to do this in order to survive. And, while we talk about the brutality of the Chinese alien rule in Tibet, Tibetans have nonetheless survived, and Tibetan culture is alive, and the Tibetans have a very subtle, insightful reading of all of these slogans, all of which have been translated into Tibetan as well as into English as official versions. And this Decoding Ccp Project always uses those official translations. So it's not just an exercise in saying, oh, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. It gives the user a chance to, first of all, see China's official presentation and representation of itself in various languages. And, this is a triangulated, trilingual website that will launch in 11 days from now, which we're giving you a little bit of a preview for. So it gives the user plenty of space to work out for themselves what to make of it, rather than telling you, they're lying, this is the truth. It's not that simple.
Oh, thank you, Gabriel. So indeed, there's a lot that the Tibetans can tell the world about China's discourse. And as you have just mentioned, very well mentioned, we have been living side by side for centuries, for thousands of years. So it's been a constant negotiation throughout these centuries. Now, in the era of the People's Republic of China now, and in the recent years, since now China has started to move more forcefully, should I say, in the international realm, there's like a lot of people do not really understand or are clueless how to go about it, how to deal with the government of China. And I've noticed that, there's been a proliferation of dictionaries of the Chinese slogans. Over here, I want to mention that excellent dictionary published by Marlene Oud of the Raoul Allenbach Institute and Dunhausen from the Merricks, their project titled as Decoding China. It's an excellent resource. Basically covers how to interpret Chinese slogans in the international Relations and International Development Coordination. So the Decoding CCP project, which Gabriel Lafitte and Tsering Dorje have been working on, like at first, my impression was it's like a dictionary. It's like a glossary of terms. But I read that the way the Tibetan Centre for Human Rights and Democracy sees it is it's more in terms of a thesaurus. So could you elaborate on that, like how the two projects complement each other, and how what is different about this Decoding CCP project that the Tibetans have to offer? That's a question for you. Okay.
Okay. What's different about it is that this is more comprehensive, it's more up to date, but I think it's also more spacious in its attitude. I mean, another organization that recently did something, a little bit similar is Amnesty International, and they call their website What China Says, and the very name of the website, I think, implies we're going to tell you what China does as against what China says. So that's a binary. It's either or. I think what we need for the long term is something that on the one hand is up to date and stays up to date, but also gives the user room to understand the resonances in Chinese history and Chinese culture, which the current central leaders come back to validate their policies and also the unconscious biases that they inherit from the ancestors that they venerate. So the whole project, I think, needs a bit more depth. So a thesaurus, as against a glossary, a thesaurus gives you, a wide range of similar concepts, and you pick, you choose, you decide which ones are actually the most appropriate. Now, there are many scholars who have produced over the years sort of dictionaries of China newspeak, as Professor Jeremy Varmey calls it, which in turn is borrowed, of course, from George Orwell's Newspeak in 1984, and yet there aren't actually that many that are really current and that sort of strike that sort of middle ground between an in-depth academic essay that plunges you for an entire chapter into all of the historic resonances, as against something that just takes a simple political stance. So we're somewhere in the middle there.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So I just wanted to remind our audience that there are excellent resources out there. I just want to mention, as I mentioned earlier, Decoding China. It's the actual website is decodingchina.eu, as in European Union. And then, of course, there's also another project from the China Media Project. And now we have the Tibetan perspective of Decoding CCP. So all these resources are excellent tools for people who deal with China in their daily life, bankers, investors, researchers, analysts, government employees, you name it. So these are excellent resources. So please do take a look at all these resources when trying to understand China. So for the next question, I would turn to Tsering Dorje. You have lived experience in Tibet, and the Tibetans in Tibet, that's the only slogans that they hear all the time, all the day, like in their home, during the inspections, and now also like increasingly visually everywhere on the print media, online media, billboards, neighborhood walls, on the rocks, big and small. So it's everywhere, these slogans. How do the Tibetans inside Tibet react to these slogans? What is their thinking about these slogans?
So I'm not sure how all the Tibetans individually respond the Chinese slogans. So in general, as my own experience and also the people I lived around me in Tibet, and so I just want to introduce a small, very interesting story, just small short story and an example. When the Communist Party flooded slogans and campaigns, so revolutionary struggling campaigns. So there's at that time, Tibetan are lost in the slogans and the campaigns, which is came from alien, like they never known, they lived peacefully, but suddenly took up by dictatorship and Chinese communist. Then one lady said, when very old lady, she was very innocent and so she lived in a peaceful life. Suddenly, communist appeared. The communist PLA, and everything changed upside down. One struggle, one slogan after another. Then the lady, one day, they say, we are going to socialist Chinese, the socialism. They are going to start socialism, and they campaigned everything. But then they are going to, now China was going to communist region. Then the lady said, oh, we had gone so far. Now we have gone socialism. Now we are going to communism. How can I go there? I don't even have a new boot to go to communism. So you see, that's the emptiness of the slogans behind it. Yeah, the pre-designed political struggles. So some is very innocent and very, those Tibetans, they don't know how to cope with it. But many of them just follow because they have to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So they just shout along the Communist Party. They don't know the meaning. And some are very wise and very smart Tibetans. They try to seek a way, use that those negative slogans, take an opportunity and save themselves, not only for individual lives and individual, daily living or feed their belly, but whole Tibetan culture, whole Tibetan future and the population. So there are great people there and try to guide Tibetans and lead the Tibetans, even though in that overwhelming, so helpless situation. They respond. They then decode why Communist Party say that. What's behind? What is for us? What it will impact for us? Then they respond. Then they try the maximum possibility and wisdom to use it a positive way. Yeah, that's the general.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Tsering Dorje, thank you very much for sharing that story about the lady. I can totally empathize with her dilemma. As a professional researcher, I come across, that's my job, to read through Chinese media and Chinese leaders' speeches, and I struggle with all these catchphrases that are in there. In a particular speech, I can come across anywhere between at least 10 or 15 catchphrases. Eat this, do that, don't do that, 5 of these, don't do that. There are so many of these catchphrases, and I can totally empathize with the lady getting so confused with all these directions, or should we say guidance being given by the party leaders. Now I want to also ask you, the Communist Party has in a way make it palatable, to make it attractive to the Tibetans. They've also been co-opting a lot of Tibetan Buddhist concepts like enlightenment and liberation into these party slogans, right? We have now this so-called peaceful liberation of Tibet, and very recently, just about a couple of months ago, there was a very grand 70th commemoration of the peaceful liberation of Tibet. And, the liberation in that phrase, how is it co-opted by the Communist Party, and how is it presented to the Tibetans?
Yeah, so as I said before, so the Tibetans lived as a peaceful, religious, and mostly they respect the lives, and also the care, not only the care of the themselves and the next generation. So life cycle, enlightenment. So this is Tibetans how they live. They don't want to hurt people. But the communist slogans, their political ideology, totally incompatible with this, but they have to cope with that. So at the beginning of the in 1950s, in order to, as the Communist Party say, the United Front, try to convert some Tibetans activities, Tibetans extremists, even after they force them to do something, they haven't had no choice. Then they have to live with this giant enemy. Yeah. So they organized some translation teams for the propagandas, and then they had to use words, those foreign words, maybe from the communist Russia. So very new. We don't know. It's not featured in geographically or in the culturally. So they have to use the words. Then you say the liberation, So it's a good name. Yeah. So in Tibetan, say Jing Zhe. Jing means binded by the defiles, 5 defiles, and then liberated. You become Buddha or Buddhahood. Then Jing. So that means they use it. Jing means in the past, Tibetans are not liberated. Somebody controlled, and they are in the dark and suffering. Then Communist Party, the PLA came and liberated them. So they are free. Is it true? Yeah, so they use these words. They are very flexible to use this and convert into their own language and let the people accept it easily. They have very skillful to check how the Tibetans think, what is the Tibetans' ideology, and then they create their own. So that makes them easy to understand. So they're like, for example, peace, Shide, Shiva. There's a Chinese, the Communist Party, they understand it by their own, their discourse, and then they also absorb some words from Tibetans' daily use, or in Buddhism, like Jingzhe and Shiva, and so many other words, and both sides accept it. Then China wins. We liberate you. We liberate you. And from your those aristocrats or the region. So that's so there are many other words, Tibetan words, original Tibetan words used as Chinese jargon, Communist Party jargon, then easily convert and brainwash.
Indeed. Just because you also mentioned about the term peace. The government of China uses these terms very freely: peace, human rights, rule of law, all these concepts that have a very, very different meaning when it comes to the Chinese context. So unfortunately, many people just hear it and read it like intuitionally for especially people living in the liberal democracies. But I just want to remind that it has a totally different meaning when it comes to Chinese context. And talking about co-opting the Buddhist ideas and concepts into the communist slogans, also when it comes to international relations, the government of China all had co-opted the Buddhist concept of the 5 principles, right? The Chinese have early in the establishment of the People's Republic of China, there was this thing called the 5 principles of coexistence, which was called Panch Shil. Panch Shil is a Buddhist concept of 5 principles of not lying, not killing, not conducting any sexual misconduct or intoxicating to cloud your mind, and so forth. These are all Buddhist values, and then that they converted, co-opted that into international relations term of 5 principles of coexistence. But then it's history, and that framework didn't really work well, and so now we are here at a very different stage in China. So now talking about the current Decoding Ccp project, there are like hundreds of terms that you have analyzed and covered in this project. And I want to just go through some of these according to the time that we have right now. So Gabriel, I would turn towards you and ask you about, because you have been an environmentalist for such a long time, and so the current buzzword that comes up again and again in the recent weeks, especially in the just concluded COP26 climate conference, this phrase, ecological civilization, it's something sounds very nice though. It's very catchy, but what does it actually mean? And I just want to read an excerpt from the Xinhua, the Chinese state media, a very short excerpt, which reads something like this: that the China proposed philosophy of ecological civilization has gained recognition from the international community as the Kunming Declaration was adopted at the key UN Environment Conference COP15. The philosophy put forward in 2018 comprised several principles, including ensuring harmony between humans and nature and regarding a sound ecological environment as the most inclusive advantage to people's well-being. Well, that sounds very, very nice. But in the actual reality, it doesn't really apply to me, at least from what I research about. So Gabriel, from your environmentalist perspective, could you explain to us what does this term mean, ecological civilization?
Thank you, Nogela. Yes, it's a real puzzle. In English, I think we don't normally put ecology and civilization in one package. We have maybe inherited from the scientific ecologists an assumption that an ecosystem is something that functions by itself best without human interference. But for China, ecological civilization must be constructed, and the construction of ecological civilization, which is a standard phrase, in turn requires an arduous struggle. And again, I'm deliberately using the terminology that is used all the time. And in order to wage an arduous struggle to construct ecological civilization, you need, in charge of such a project, the only people with the capability, the resolve, the will, the capacity for mastery of everything in nature, namely the Chinese Communist Party. So we have a paradox here. We have wonderful language of living, in harmony between man and nature, and that is, again, although that's sexist, it is the standard Chinese translation. Man and nature somehow need constant management, and at the same time, in order to preserve ecosystems, to build ecological civilization, the way it works out in practice on the ground is that human beings largely need to be excluded from areas that are held to be degraded and for which those primitive, backward, ignorant Tibetan nomads are blamed. And that in turn really means that China has come up with yet another justification for actually depopulating the Tibetan highlands and moving large numbers of people who are simply classified officially as, surplus rural labour, as if they're sort of a rural proletariat who are just sort of wandering around aimlessly like animals, and herding them off into the urban workforce to construct new China, new cities. So we have a real paradox here. It all comes back to, again, those imperial assumptions that China knows best, China is benevolent, China is the older brother. I'm deliberately throwing as many Chinese phrases as I can in. The Tibetans are, weak, passive, dependent, living in the past, remote, backward. They are in urgent need of a blood transfusion, and only modern China with its strength can provide that blood transfusion to bring the Tibetans into history. And that in turn, I think, brings us actually very close to some of China's most recent slogans to do with, building discourse power and presenting itself as a world leader in ecological civilization. And it is very significant in the article that you just quoted, Nogela. China is claiming that, COP26, the climate COP, and a few weeks earlier, COP15, the biodiversity COP, all adopted China's key phrases. And some of those phrases were included in the official resolutions. They didn't really sort of stand out, but China uses those to claim leadership and gradually shift the balance and shift the discourse so that it becomes a new normal. And that is actually problematic, because one of the other current slogans is that the Chinese Communist Party has just a week or so ago passed a long document called a resolution on the history of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, that, resolution firmly declares that, in the 100 years of its existence, the Chinese Communist Party has never made mistakes. It has always benefited China, and to critique, to use critical thinking, which is, the essence of democracy, to use critical thinking to suggest that the party has ever made mistakes is a serious crime, and you can be put in jail for years. Now, where does that leave the Tibetans? If the Tibetans want to say, well, actually, yes, there is degradation on the grasslands. There are areas where there used to be grass, where there is now bare soil. Tibetans would love to have the opportunity to sow native grasses and look after them and nurture them through the difficult winters, but instead they're removed. But if Tibetans say, well, actually the reason for degradation is past policy failures coming from central leaders imposing their will from above, because they had this fixation that, we are the masters of the universe, we have scientific knowledge, we know how to do development. You ignorant, backward people don't really know the land that you live on and your ancestors have lived on for so many centuries. But Tibetans can't say that, because that will mean that they are guilty of the very serious crime of historical nihilism. Now, if you look up US statutes, I think you won't find historical nihilism amongst the many crimes, but in China it is. Historical nihilism is the crime of saying the Communist Party rule has made mistakes. There have been policy failures. Well, which regime is so brittle that it cannot concede that, in 100 years it has made mistakes? So that's an example of, why a whole wide range of people, I think, do need to take a look at Communist Party jargon, and who better than the Tibetans to enable that? If you think back 20 years ago when the United States discovered it was in a war against terror, it suddenly needed quite urgently to recruit people who had long experience with Islamic extremism. And it's really striking the number of terrorism experts in all of the think tanks and policy advice institutions and so on who come from India. India has, I think, provided the world with a very high proportion of experts on Islamic terror. And I would say that, we are now in a similar situation where the world, all sorts of people need to discover how to read Chinese slogans, and the Tibetans can really help.
Indeed, Gabriel, indeed. You just touched a bit about the 6th plenum resolution. I'll come back to you about that. But before that, I want to ask also, staying on the topic, I want to ask Tsering Dorje about this Marxist dialectics about contradiction between grasses and animals. So this is under this slogan, the grasslands are depopulated, and the Tibetan herders have been now moved from their traditional pastures into some weird ghetto-ish kind of a town built instantly to accommodate them into town fringes. So we are literally talking about several thousands, possibly crossing into a few millions. So Tsering Dorje, as someone who has lived in Tibet, who have done field research in Tibet, and who is now also doing research from your home base now in Australia, could you explain to us or tell us about the situation of the Tibetan herders? What is going on about their lives? So what is their current status? So yeah, this is all. When I see or hear this term contradiction between grass and animals, instantly the herders come to my mind. So would you be able to elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. So yeah, I can't present the Tibetan nomads or the herders, but my own knowledge, based on my knowledge and the experience. I lived in Tibet and lived at the nomadic area as a teacher, and yeah, through the students and the nomads. So the China, the Communist Party, not only the China Communist Party, they are scientists and environmentalists and ecologists. Those scientists, so very arrogant, as Gabriel always says. Yeah, so the imperialist arrogance. So they think they are brothers, they are saviors. Yeah, so the way you live is no, it's not not good, beneficial for the ecology. But that's but long time ago, they deforested. The seed nature. We must use this nature. Even the human nature have to use serve for the revolution purpose. Yeah, building a communist utopia, and we need to use the natural resource. So collectivize the Tibetan traditional nomads, and the government instruct the scientists. They control the number of the animals, and the people are collectivized, the commune system, right?
Mm.
Then
Mm.
they overgrazed.
Mm.
They disturbed the very ecological, the human and the ecology balance, which Tibetan culture, Tibetan way of Tibetan living, and these especially the religious. So they see the nature as a gift from their own karma, from previous karma. We say Chintun Sunam, the collective karma. So we have to respect the land, respect the animals. Even we kill the animal, we feel guilt. Sorry, we eat it, but we pray, and as much as we pray and we feel guilt, repent every time we pray. So that's we respect life. But Communist Party says the scientists say you're wasting. Yeah, these animals you have to sell. You increase your bank account and convert it into cash. So it's total different idea, different ideology. So atheism and Tibetans. So then they intervened Tibetan way of life. Then the series of destructions caused by the policy makings and the scientists caused Tibetan still happening. So they have Tibetan nomads have no say, have no choice. If they protest, we have heard protest, people get arrested, detained, sentenced. That's what they are. So the most of common Tibetan herds keep silent. No way. We can do nothing. Save self. So many things happening. So if you read the Gabriel Lafitte the blog, so many things I have there. I can't go there. So anyway, in general, so they have no choice. They don't respect the environment, the traditional, and the real ecologists are Tibetans. Their culture and the combination of culture and ecology. So that saves. We don't exploit the Tibetans, nomads don't exploit the nature and the pastures, animals. They just live and respect the life. So now they are facing really difficult. So materializing lies, push them materialization, and very difficult. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, regarding the nomads, like in the past, it has been like they have been asked to increase their meat productivity by the central planners, and then suddenly, in order to when there's like flooding in mainland China, they are now blamed for those flooding, and the Chinese have come to impose this slogan of contradiction between the grass and the animals, and then they are all depopulated from the grasslands into these ghettoish town, and they just are put there on some sort of meager government subsidy, so they cannot move forward in life because they are not trained to participate in the Chinese economy, and that they cannot move back to their traditional life. So they are stuck in the middle. So that's a very, very sad situation for them. And when I see or hear about this slogan about the contradiction between grass and animals, what I really think is when it comes to China's carbon emissions is there's a contradiction between Chinese factories and ozone layer. So that is the real contradiction. But instead of recognizing the real contradiction, the contradiction is in a way deflected upon the nomads. So, and that's the sorry state of affairs that is on the Tibetan plateau these days. So I believe I have a lot of more such terms that I wanted to ask, but obviously time does not permit. But I would definitely urge our listeners in the audience that do take a look at the fantastic work done by Gabriel and Tsering Dorje, and I believe it's going to be the project is going to be live next week, and it is it is a living project. As China throws in more slogans, it's going to be more work for the two of you as researchers to again analyze and present it to the people. But it is definitely very, very valuable and helpful. Just to remind the website to our audience, it is decoding ccp.org. So do take a chance to look at it and take advantage of the expertise these two researchers have. Lots of years of experience. Gabriel, you have like 40 plus years of experience, and Tsering Dorje also at least 25 plus years. So that's a lot of experience out there. And to conclude, if our audience are not able to follow through all of what we discussed right now, I do not really blame, because these slogans are very, very tricky to understand. But I would, if they can, as their takeaway, if they take away that, when they hear a Chinese slogan, if it strikes their mind that what it seems and what it is are two different things, then I think we have served the purpose for today. Thank you very much, Gabriel, and thank you very much, Tsering Dorje, and back to you, Ashwin.
Yes, thank you, Noge, and yes, thank you very much, Gabriel and Tsering. That was very interesting and illuminating conversation for all of us, and so we really appreciate your time being here on Tibet Talks today. We are having some folks in the audience want to learn a little bit more about how they can access Decoding CCP, and I know Norge talked a little bit about the URL. Could you guys talk a little bit about when you expect this to be live and where people can find it and how they can kind of best make use of it? Gabriel, do you?
Launch date is actually 30 November. That's when the site goes live. And it is trilingual. So if your starting point is something you've heard, to use Norge's example, a contradiction between grass and animals, a classic sort of Marxist dialectic formulation, which may not be a formulation familiar to a lot of people these days, you can start off in English. If you can read some Chinese, you can start off in Chinese. But also importantly, most of the terms, and in the coming months, nearly all the terms will also be available with a Tibetan take on it. So it's fluid, it's flexible, and I really can't stress enough, we're not trying to tell people what to think. We're just giving you enough information to make up your own mind. And I'm really glad that Norge mentioned some of the other glossaries that do exist, because there is a lot out there. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. There is a massive sinology industry, the number of people who are earnestly trying to discern the motives and intentions behind the very attractive phrases that the Chinese Communist Party uses is growing all the time. And yet there's still a great deal of confusion as to, how to make sense of all of this. So we really do think that the Tibetan angle, given that, the latest archaeology shows that Tibetans have lived in Tibet for, anything up to 50,000 years, and share genetics with early humans who developed the ability to live at extremely high altitudes in ways that Chinese still struggle with. So how did Tibetans manage to live for 50,000 years in Tibet? How did they survive the last ice age? They must have known something about the land and something about what the land's limits are and capabilities are. And to just sweep that all aside with a simplistic Marxist dialectic that there is a contradiction between grass and animals. You can have grass or you can have animals. You can't have both. That's basically what it's saying. Well, the logic of nomadism is if you're intelligent, and careful and mobile. You can have both. So please do, when the site launches on the 30th of November, please do have a look.
Thank you. It's a really fascinating subject. Everything you touched on there certainly sparks my interest. We could talk about this for hours. Fortunately, we are running out of time, but I do want to ask one final question here before we go. Maybe Tsering, I will direct this to you. Can you talk a little bit about the process of how long it took to actually put this Decoding CCP project together? And then what do you see as the future for this tool? Is this something that you expect to constantly be updating with as new information and new slogans are used? Where do you see this kind of going in the future?
Yeah, this is an ongoing project, and also the Communist Party they create new jargons. They won't stop and continues. So we hope, the project will provide some key and popular jargons decoded and present to the audience. And the most importantly, the audience, if they give feedback and so they give feedback, we can improve and as much as we can. So this is our an ongoing project. So it's developing, launch. It doesn't mean it's finished there. Yeah, so the audience feedback is valuable. Yeah.
And just one last time for our audience, the URL for the project.
Sorry, I can't hear it.
What's the website? What's the URL to find Decoding CCP?
Decoding ccp.org. Yeah. Is that right, Gabriel? Yeah.
Yes.
So we definitely, please go ahead, Gabriel.
No, simple, memorable. Decodingccp.org.
Absolutely. And we certainly encourage all of you who are watching this to please check that out once it is ready to go at the end of the month. And once again, we want to extend our heartfelt gratitude to both Gabriel and Tsering for joining us today on Tibet Talks and for sharing this very, very valuable information with all of us. So thank you both so much. Thank you, Norge La, for leading us through this conversation and then moderating this discussion. We are just about out of time here on Tibet Talks, but we will be back next month on December 9th with another episode of Tibet Talks featuring Rima Fujita, who is a fine artist and the author of The Extraordinary Life of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, An Illuminated Journey. So we hope you will all join us for that. Until next time, happy holidays to you all. And as we always say, stay safe, stay well, and stay active. Thank you very much.